Welcome back. Our next presenter is Kyra Brooks, who worked with Professor Whiteside on energy drinks, the fuel of dirt bikes. I'm personally very excited to get to work next to Professor Whiteside and heard this presentation was coming, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Hi guys, thank you for coming. I'm impressed that we full enough people were coming to this with a name. Energy drinks don't actually fuel your bike, just in case you're wondering. My name is Tyler Links. My professor that I work with was Susan Whiteside, and thank you guys for coming. So the agenda of this, first off, we're going to kind of introduce action sports and energy drinks and why I wanted to talk about this in the first place. We're going to introduce the key concepts. There's 3 of them. Talk about what makes this relevant. Why are we talking about energy drinks and dirt bikes in the first place? Look a little bit into the history and insight of both the energy drink market and dirt bike racing and action sports as they coincide. The 3 key concepts themselves, we're going to go to after that. It's going to be generational shifts from Generation Y to Generation Z. Energy drinks and dirt bike racing, how they kind of came to be, why they came to be. And finally, Generation Z and new media, so influencer media, working with social media, et cetera, and finally will be a pretty general conclusion. So the question that I introduced with was, why are the 3 major energy drink companies, which are Red Bull, Monster Energy, and Rockstar Energy, so heavily involved with the dirt bike racing industry? And I'm going to kind of talk about a little later what I mean by them being so heavily involved. It's not like they're just sponsoring an event or something. It goes quite a bit deeper than that. So the research that I did, I started with a lot of scholastic works, academic journals, and then another thing that I looked into, which was actually really interesting, was a woman's MBA thesis that she wrote, which had to do with the energy drinks and how the market was changing. I also conducted a couple of first-hand interviews. I got one with a broadcast journalist from NBC Sports who actually works on the Supercross series itself. I have 2 print journalists from RacerX Online, which is an online and print publication. And one of them also has his own podcast. And finally, through my own contracted work, I'm contracted through a company that does live broadcasts of the amateur Supercross events that follow the professional ones. They're literally the day after. And I work as a commentator and interviewer doing that stuff as well. The key concepts that we want to touch on, as I talked about earlier, are generational desires, Generation Y versus Generation Z. Generation Y, obviously, for the most part, kind of being the parents or the intermediate parents to Generation Z. And then you have energy drinks and dirt bike racing, the 3 companies which we already talked about, and how those companies all culminate to sponsor the series, the products, the teams, the individual riders, social media, commercials, etc., all of the above. And then finally, you have Generation Z and new media. So you have the social media marketing and the introduction of influencers and athletes as influencers. So energy drinks and dirt bike racing, how they kind of coincide, what makes this really unique is, first off, you have them actually sponsoring racing series. So Monster Energy sponsors the Monster Energy Supercross series, which is the premier series in the United States. It is broadcast on NBC Sports. They have 17 events, and they're all broadcast. Within that, each of the 3 energy drink companies all sponsor their own team. You have Monster Energy Kawasaki, Red Bull KTM, and Rockstar Husqvarna Factory Racing Team. These companies also sponsor a multitude of other teams that aren't as prevalent, but these are their marquee teams. You also have them sponsoring individual riders outside of teams. You get these special cases where a guy like Dean Wilson, who's had quite a few injuries, isn't going to find himself on one of those teams, but he still wants to go to the races. So Rockstar came up with a budget for him and provided him a bike so that he could show up at the races out of his own van. And halfway through the series this year, he found himself on a factory team after someone else was injured. So Rockstar Energy put all the money in for that. We also have products. So Red Bull and Rockstar Energy actually sponsored their own dirt bikes, and they have done so for the past couple of years. So you can actually go to a dealership and buy a bike that has Red Bull logos, and it would be a KTM bike, or you can buy a bike with Rockstar edition logos, and it would be a Husqvarna. And like I said, they have been doing that for the last couple of years. Monster Energy has also done that previously. So the history and insight, while they do all of these things, they sponsor all of these different aspects. They do other things, so they do commercials and such. We just don't have time to talk about it. The amount of viewership that they're getting and inherently the amount of money that they're spending is a lot less when you compare it to some other motorsports that they sponsor. So F1, which is sponsored by Red Bull, they have one of the top teams, has 100 million viewers at select events. NASCAR, which is title sponsored by Monster Energy has a team, has 3 million at select events. Monster Energy Supercross set a record this year that was at 800,000 for one event. But what makes this so unique is that for F1 and for NASCAR, you just have one company sponsoring one thing or two things. With Monster Energy Supercross, they're sponsoring everything. And then the other thing that we wanted to look into was action sports and how they met the mainstream media and when that happened. So you had X Games introduced in 1995, and it was an action sports competition where you had dirt bike riding as well as skateboarding, snowboarding, BMX, et cetera, et cetera. It was broadcast on ESPN, and it was kind of the first unified look at action sports in popular media. And then the first introduction that was actually sponsored by arguably a sports drink company was the Dew Tour, which is obviously Mountain Dew, and it began in the early 2000s. It was broadcast on NBC Sports, and it was much of the same. It was actually a series, and it had all of those separate sports events in it, and it's actually known, through my research, I found out that it actually kind of gave Mountain Dew a sort of demography that they were looking for in their sales. It gave them a group of people that could identify themselves with the product. So again, on the history and insight, we move on to the companies. Red Bull was introduced in 1987, but it didn't kind of gain a hold and a footing until the late 90s. You saw them sponsor dirt bike racing teams in 2002, and also in 2002 they launched their own freestyle dirt bike competition called the Red Bull X Fighters. Rockstar and Monster Energy followed soon after. They were both introduced as brands in between 2000 and 2002, and they started sponsoring teams right after Red Bull in 2003 and 2004. So the first concept I wanted to touch on was the concept of moving from Generation Y to Generation Z. Generation Y was born between 1977 and 1994, but their coming of age, which is what we're really looking at, is between 1998 and 2006. They were already well established as an age group. They were well into their teens and 20s with the creation of the X Games, the X Fighters, and the Dew Tour, which were all of these action sports events. They were also around for the creation of Monster Energy and Rockstar, as well as the coming of age of Red Bull. And during that time when they were growing up, what they were accustomed to seeing, if they were influenced by Supercross racing, were sponsors like Camel, Coors, and Miller High Life. So these companies were really hitting hard with these cigarettes and alcohol. Moving into Generation Z, things have kind of changed. You have these different competitions bringing into light action sports to the mainstream media. So instead of having everyone's children in Generation Z moving into ball sports, you have some of them buying skateboards or buying dirt bikes or buying bicycles and kind of taking the alternative sports route. What we also see is that the energy drink market is between the ages of 18 to 34 generally, and Generation Z every year is aging more and more into that group. What we also saw with looking into Supercross, which is owned by Feld Entertainment, Dave Prater, who works for Feld Entertainment, put out a press release that said that 18% of the people that either show up or watch are in between the ages of 18 to 24, but more interestingly, 57% of the people that attend or watch have children between the ages of 2 and 17. Those people are aging into that energy drink market every year. Generation 2 is Concept 2 is the head-to-head competition. It's unlike any other motorsport as we talked about. You have Red Bull and F1 and Monster Energy with NASCAR. All three of these companies, though, are sponsoring Supercross racing or motocross racing. You have 6 factory Supercross teams. What I mean by that is there are 6 manufacturers of dirt bikes. They each have one team that's at the top level. 4 of those are sponsored by energy drink companies and 2 are not. What's even more interesting about that is Joe Gibbs Racing. That's one of their bikes right there. They are not sponsored by an energy drink company, but they are owned by a company that owns a NASCAR team, which obviously requires a lot more money. There's a lot more influence and they have a lot more contacts. But this year, they were not able to find a title sponsor for their dirt bike team, which is interesting because it shows that it is really hard to find the proper funding if you do not have that energy drink money behind you. So what that kind of goes into is industry dependence. You know, you start to have this issue where these energy drink dollars are really needed. But what does that mean for the energy drink companies? They still have F1, they still have NASCAR. So what is that going to do in the future? And that becomes more prevalent as you see stock prices continuing to surge with Monster Energy. They're the only publicly traded company. But as you can see in the graphic over there, that's actually a 15-year look at their company. Their stocks are only going up marginally. And finally, you have this idea where these two industries will kind of build up together. You have dirt bike racing coming into prevalence in the late 90s. You have energy drink companies literally being born in the late 90s. And they develop together kind of this lifestyle of being on the edge or just the whole action sports mentality. And that's what links them together, the energy drinks and the motorsports, and specifically dirt bike racing. And finally, the last concept is the shift to social media marketing. With Generation C, you've seen the prevalence of YouTube and social media sites. I mostly looked at Instagram, but it also works with Twitter and or Facebook. You have the introduction of paid advertising into social media. So like on YouTube, you can see before you watch a video, sometimes you'll have to watch an advertisement. Or if you're on Instagram or Facebook, sometimes you'll see sponsored or promoted posts. And it's also the introduction of viral followings. There are these people that have come to fruition through social media. You saw this a little bit with the Kardashians and such, things like that. And it's also carried over into sports and athletes. So then it moves into the idea of selling this lifestyle. Like we talked about, it's kind of edgy, it's kind of out there. It's alternative sports. It's not what you're generally used to. And you have these athletes that are becoming able to sell themselves and sell products through their social media. And they have this really interesting target marketing because they have a certain type of person that will follow their page or that follows what they're into. So when an advertiser is looking to spend money, they can go, oh, that person has this demographic. This is what we think we're going to get from it. So when you actually look at specific athletes, you've got Travis Pastrana, who has 3 million Instagram followers. He's probably one of the most well-known from dirt bike racing. The most recent thing he did was something called Evel Knievel Live, where he actually did a tribute to Evel Knievel. What's most interesting looking at that and how it relates to these energy drink companies is, as you can see in this photo, Red Bull is prominently on his helmet. In pretty much every shot that featured Travis Pastrana in this featured film, you can see Red Bull. He may not have been drinking the drink, but it was plastered all over everything he was doing. The second would be Ken Roczen, who has 1.2 million Instagram followers. Much of the same thing, he's sponsored by Red Bull. But what makes him so important is he's actually a top-level athlete now, whereas Travis was one in the past. And with that, Ken has had 2 double arm reconstructions in the last 2 years. So that story itself kind of transitioned into the mainstream sports news because he actually was able to come back from that. He's competing at the top level now. And again, whenever you watch something with him, he's got a Red Bull hat on or a Red Bull shirt on or something of that nature. And the last one is probably the most interesting one. At a recent race where I was a commentator and doing interviews, I met an amateur kid named Canyon Bridgers. He has 75,000 Instagram followers and is only 11 years old. He's already done videos with Travis Pastrana and Ricky Carmichael, who's another famous racer. And what's really interesting about that is whether or not he makes it as a pro racer when he becomes an adult, he already has this following that he can sell to his companies and say, look, I have this group of people, I can sell your products, I have this following. Whether or not I win you any national championships or make you any money as a racer, it's not important anymore. So in conclusion, what's really interesting about this is that all 3 of these energy drink companies have come together and supported the same thing with the same lifestyle. And as they do that, they're all reaping the rewards. They've made this sport something that people actually care about. And because of that, they're all benefiting from it financially. Their combined ROI just keeps getting bigger. When we look at why they chose this sport, it has a lot to do with Generation C becoming of age at the same time that dirt bike racing was finding its footing, and the fact that the energy drink demography and the dirt bike racing demography are basically exactly the same. And finally, you've got the social media magic, where you have these athletes who have this sort of clout, who are able to sell products just through posting them on the internet. And the idea that the energy drink narrative matches what they're already posting in their original content. But if you don't remember anything else from this, one of the most important things to remember is that dirt bike racing needs this energy drink money, but energy drink companies don't need dirt bike racing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler. We have time now for questions from the audience.
I'm interested in brand differentiation for this particular promotional approach that you described. So I don't watch NASCAR, I don't watch dirt bike racing. You know, you see, you've educated me. I've
Right.
learned a bit about this. But one of the things I'm thinking about is that, you know, for the audience member tuning in, I see, you know, 3 different energy drink companies, and this is probably just, you know, you speculating, but I'd love to hear you speculate about whether those companies have a hard time differentiating, you know, sort of like that phenomenon of, you know, my favorite racer uses an energy drink, and it's, oh, I don't remember which one, I'm in the grocery store, this is the cheaper one, I'm buying this one, like, that is driving the consumer to be interested in energy drinks. But do you think there's a challenge getting them to buy the specific brand, and that do you get the sense that each brand really has its own traits
I
in
think
this scenario?
I think that's what made this one so quirky, kind of why I wanted to do it anyway. I think their thought process with this and how they use it to kind of get out there and get known was the idea that since they're all 3 in it, it's like the rising tide raises all boats.
Okay.
It's almost like it doesn't matter. As long as someone's walking in and getting an energy drink. Maybe they're saying 6 in one, half a dozen the other, actually choose which one. But it's the idea that you're just getting more people through the door to buy one. But based on the actual advertising itself, it would be really hard to distinguish which one is like winning, if that makes any sense, because they are so all heavily involved. I think like I was saying earlier, I really do think it just has to do with getting bodies in the door.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't have a question but a comment. Fascinating project and excellent presentation.
Thank you.
You did a really good job.
I appreciate it. Sure.
I have a question, but I'm happy to let others ask first. You asked. You went first. Thank you. I'm afraid this might be a dumb question. I'm more afraid that the intro is going to get Mason seem dumber, so I'm going to hold off on that. But maybe, do you think that the fact that there's this way for racers to make money, and that if you explained, that isn't necessarily tied to a long future of being good at the sport, do you think that changes the nature of the sport or the degree of competitiveness? Or I mean, this might be something that maybe you can answer just as much from the perspective as a commentator as doing your academic research. Or do you think that you see an effect on how the athletes actually engage with the sport?
Yes, but I talked about this a little bit in the actual paper itself. We just didn't have time. But there's this whole other path now where you have these guys that they do what's called free riding, and they take these really aesthetic looking videos with this really good riding, but it has nothing to do with racing. They'll literally just go out into the environment somewhere, kind of forge their own path, or even go out to a desert where there's a lot of jumps that are made out of dunes and stuff. They make these really cool looking videos, but other than being an art form, there's no racing to it. But they're still sponsored by the same companies. That's actually a big part of my paper is Monster Energy sponsors the brother duo of Axel Hodges and Ash Hodges. Ash is the filmer, Axel's the writer, and they put out some fantastic looking videos. And Ash has over 20 million views on YouTube. So, yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought it was so fascinating that you connected this aspect of sports to what you see also, like you said yourself, in reality television therapies. Not me talking about the Kardashians, but we mean because it also there are shows like The Bachelor where you see people clearly don't even care about winning anymore because there's this completely separate path to revenue, which is what you have to like, oh, here. So thank you. It's really fascinating.
Thank you.
Related to what you were asking, it seems like in my lifetime, the sports, whether it's running or any other kind of sports, they have evolved and people have gotten stronger and better and they keep doing that. Do you think that this being not connected to the competition as much will slow that progression?
Surprisingly, no. It actually does the opposite because, contrary to popular belief, these energy drink companies actually care a lot about their athletes. Red Bull has its own medical facility, and one of the top riders I was talking about, he did his double arm reconstruction, Kit Roxon, has been having trouble at altitude breathing, and he was actually sent to their medical office for a week to do as much extensive testing as they could possibly do to figure out what's wrong with him. And a lot of their other athletes, including the ones that are doing the free riding and going out, when they get hurt, they go to the same place. So contrary to popular belief, they're actually pushing and they're teaching these guys how to train, how to become more fit. And it's surprisingly enough coming from these companies that are making these products that arguably aren't that healthy.
Are there questions in your room? I answered your questions. Okay.
I was going to ask, do you think that like the situation with motocross and other action sports relating to sponsors, do you see it as being critically different from other sports, or are they pretty common, the way that the sponsors and sports interact?
It's a little bit different in that the money is a lot more scarce, and even at the top level of supercross racing, it's just not big enough. So on any given night during a competition, there's 20 people that make the main event. There's maybe only 15 of them that are making more than $50,000 a year. The last 5 guys are making just enough to get from race to race. And that's really interesting when you compare it to NASCAR F1, where even the guys that are in the back are making a living. It may not be a good one, but they're making enough to not kind of be hosed for the rest of the year, if that makes any sense. Whereas these guys, they only do it in the spring. If they don't make enough money, they either have to go get a real job or do one-off events in different countries to try to make enough money to get to the next year.
Yes, one last question. Thank you.
NASCAR has, each car is sponsored by a company. And this is these 3 energy drink companies only. Do they not let other sponsors in, or why do you think other sponsors don't come in?
Well, as we saw with Joe Lears Racing, they own a NASCAR team. They know what it's like to do that. They're trying, but no one's willing to pay. So it's not like they would want that, because yeah, it'd be great, but they can't get anybody to do it. They had Auto Trader for a couple of years and some other companies before that, but no one stepped up this year. And if any of the companies could do it, that company would be able to with all of their contacts outside of the industry. They still wouldn't. So it is kind of scary, because if this energy drink company is ever pulled, or the FDA makes some decision that energy drinks shouldn't be allowed, it becomes a really scary issue for motorsports like this, and even some other action sports like skateboarding and BMX, where a lot of their sponsorship money comes from these companies.
All right, thank you so much. And it's now my pleasure to introduce your advisor, Whiteside, Professor Susan Whiteside, to give you your honor stole in recognition of all that you've done.
So I told Tyler I would be here today to cheer him on, and he said, please don't embarrass me, which I really think is more of an invitation, right? But I'll respect that request. As you can tell, Tyler is incredibly knowledgeable about this world of dirt bike racing, and I'm not sure which one of us has learned more. He has introduced me to a fascinating world, and I've appreciated working with him on that. When I think back to when we first met in my office last semester, and he had this hunch about energy drinks and dirt bike racing. He wanted to explore it, and so off he went. And there was limited scholastic information, scholarly writing on this particular world of motocross and supercross, what is it, right? And so that was a little bit of a challenge. So he continued to dig deeper and tried to find insiders who would speak with him about the industry. And as he went about trying to collect that primary data, he was just doggedly in pursuit of people who would in fact take the time to talk to him. So I congratulate him on his determination to gather that information and put this paper together. It's been a pleasure to work with him, and congratulations.